we shouldn't have allowed this to get to this point because the central bank is the bank of last resort. Under normal circumstances, we should have preserved the balance sheet of the central bank. And I'll give you an example. Even though it created some kind of a moral issues here and there, when the IMF was advising developing countries, including Ghana, to restructure its debt, the IMF decided to exclude their debt and other multilateral institutions' debt from the debt restructuring. I'm sure you are aware of that. So the total multilateral debt works up to around $8.8 billion out of the total external debt of $30.2 billion as at the end of 2022. So the IMF decided that maybe for best practices, according to them, the multilateral debt, that is Ghana's indebtedness to the IMF, the World Bank, the African Development Bank, and the rest of them, were to be excluded from the debt restructuring because the IMF didn't want the debt restructuring to impair its balance sheets because they view themselves as a bank of last resort, an institution of last resort. I am sure Bank of Ghana would have probably advanced this same argument that, you know what, this is the nation's central bank. It's the bank of last resort. Under normal circumstances, we should do everything possible to preserve the balance sheet of the central bank. But now, because the debt restructuring, the progress that had been made so far was not adequate enough to move us closer to the debt sustainability point. Because contrary to what government told us, that the first round of the domestic debt exchange was highly successful, it was not. Because the total eligible bonds of 137 billion cedis ended up with a universe of eligible bonds of 98 billion cedis at the end of the day. And on the settlement date, only 85%, approximately 85% of that 98 billion cedis had tendered at various interest rates. So that meant that we had only restructured around 83 billion cedis of the 98 billion cedis of eligible bonds. If you
Right. So let's, further expand this conversation and bring in the thoughts of Dr. Patrick Sume, who is an economist and a lecturer of finance at the University of Ghana Business School. Doc, a very good evening to you. Thank you for your time.
Good evening and good evening to viewers. Thanks for having me.
Right. The Bank of Ghana, after the brouhaha, seemed to have justified what led to the losses, indicating that it was the domestic debt exchange program, plus the fact that they have some specific challenges on their books, including the fact that COCOBOD's losses are also part of this. Are those reasons, from the economic perspective, justifiable to you?
Well, so I think we have to understand why we have set up the Bank of Ghana, the central bank, to manage, it is the government's bank, it's the banker's bank, it's a regulator to ensure that the financial system is sound. It manages our monetary policy with the view to help stabilize prices and also boost economic activity. And also to ensure that the financial system is sound. Ordinarily, we don't set up the central bank to make profits or losses. So, when it comes to how we measure the performance of the central bank, whether they are making profits or making losses, is really not the goal. That's not why we set them up. We set them up to ensure that the financial system is being properly run. Monetary policy is ensuring that prices are stable and promoting growth as much as they can. So on that basis, I don't think that we should make too much of the losses. For many years, the central bank make profit, and we don't make too much of it because that's really not the reason why they are there. Now, turning to the specific reason why we've seen the extent of the losses that we've seen, clearly it's been explained in the statement itself, in the original report itself, in the preface, I think the governor had explained, and also in the statement, it's been explained that the most significant reason is the domestic debt exchange that we have done. So obviously, as a banker of last resort, I think we should prefer that the Bank of Ghana serves as like the backstop for all these losses, so that we don't have to impose heftier terms on the financial institutions and households than ensuring that the Bank of Ghana is making profit while the financial system in general is much less sound. So if you look at it, I think if you look where we were, where our balance sheets were looking, it's really like choosing between the rock and the hard place. So we have two terrible outcomes. Either we pass on more of the losses from the
we seem to be having a bit of a challenge there regarding the line. But, Doc, hopefully we have a proper connection to you. Kindly stay with us. So, I mean, on the back of what you have just said, how does this impact the current financial sector of the country? Definitely going to be worse, isn't it? Unfortunately, we seem to have lost the connection to Dr. Patrick Esumeh there, who was helping us understand, I mean, some of the reasons that the Bank of Ghana has given regarding what led to the losses of the bank. Meanwhile, we've been gauging the thoughts of the bank itself, where, clearly the Bank of Ghana says that the domestic debt exchange program, which was undertaken by government, is to be blamed for the over 60 billion cedi loss on its books, adding that strategies have been rolled out to help recoup the losses. This was in response to the public backlash on how the central bank made such losses in the 2022 audit of its own financial statement. Let's engage the thoughts of Dr. Philip Abredu Otu, who is the head of research at the Bank of Ghana, on what has accounted for this loss. Good evening, and thank you for joining us on News 360. What kind of direct or indirect impact would it have on the Ghanaian economy?
For the direct impact, yes, we've reported a loss. We'll continue to discharge our mandate. This is not going to impair our ability to continue to fight inflation. So we will continue on the path of having stable inflation and ensuring financial stability in the economy.
There are calls already that, for instance, considering the fact that you've recorded these losses, the governor should resign. Is that a position you share?
No, I don't think we are there yet. If you look at the reasons that are ascribed, there were internal and external factors, and especially, as I indicated, is the impact of the domestic debt exchange that has impacted our balance sheet. We all know what the debt exchange, why it came about, because it's a fiscal problem. So it's the debt exchange that has caused. Should the governor resign because of a debt exchange issue? I don't think so.
My final question would border on some of the specific components captured in the report. For instance, we have motor vehicle maintenance running where in excess of 130,000 Ghana cedis was used in maintaining vehicles. I beg your pardon, 130 million. We also have computer-related expenses, about 67,000. All of these have raised questions about how in these dire times the Bank of Ghana or the central bank has been able to get monies to quote-unquote maintain vehicles. How do you explain this?
Let me first explain that when we talk about motor vehicle maintenance, there are so many categories that fall under motor vehicle maintenance. It's fuel, it's insurance, it's repairs, and then we have all these regulatory stroke licensing fees that we pay also for the cars that we have in our pool. The central bank's job of ensuring that the economy keeps running is a Herculean one. We have what we call moving currency, which we call specie movement to all corners of the country. And it's a very expensive operation. So you can imagine sitting in Accra and distributing currencies as and when we get calls that currency here is short, currency there is short. We move from down south to up north, everywhere, to distribute currency. And it's a very expensive job. But that jump that we are seeing from 61 to 131, we should also bear in mind that in the year 2022, crude oil prices increased significantly. So these are significant increases. And when fuel forms a very big component of your vehicle maintenance and you are involved in such a huge operation, it impacts on your expenses this way. But let me just share some statistics with you.
Briefly, briefly.
Yeah, briefly. The fuel expenses that we've seen since 2019 has hovered around 90% of total vehicle maintenance. And for 2022, it is 94 or let's say 95%. That hasn't changed so much in terms of percentage of fuel from the vehicle maintenance. It's still about the same.
Right.
The problem has been the export prices that we face. Remember, we also buy the fuel from the market like any other human being. And this is what has accounted for this. But I think to sum things up, what has impacted the central bank's balance sheet, let me stress the point that it is the impact of the domestic debt exchange. If you isolate the impact of the domestic debt exchange from what has happened, we wouldn't have reported of this huge negative, huge losses.
Doctor Abredu, thank you so much for your time, and grateful that you made time to speak to us.